So if climate change has truly put us in the middle of World War III, I'd like to introduce you to our general. Please welcome Bill McKibben.
It is a terrific pleasure to be here with you. I may not be at the absolute top of my game for you tonight because I started the day not in the ersatz Vermont, but in the actual Vermont. And so I've come a long ways, and it's late in the evening, and I'm also a little intimidated at being here. This air in the auditorium is heavy with the smell of professorial talent. There's a lot of tenure in here, I think. It's scaring me just a little bit, but I take great strength from my friend John Cobb, who is living proof that one can be both very, very smart and very, very useful at the same time. And he's why I said I would come out to be here, and I'm awfully glad that I did. I'm always conscious of the fact that I'm wandering into these situations where where there's beautiful music. Boy, what fun to see my old friend Pete Seeger talking from beyond the grave. It was really amazing, moving moment. Wandering in these situations where there's great music and great spirit and great feeling and and my job is just to bum everybody out. But I will do that. I will make that my role, at least at the beginning tonight, just in order to kind of try and set the scene for this few days. Because we are here not for any intellectual excursion, because we live in the midst of a deep, immediate, practical crisis, probably the greatest crisis that human beings have ever wandered into. In civilizational terms, it came on us very fast. I mean, I wrote the first book about this, and it came out 26 years ago. We've known about climate change in real terms for about a quarter century. And when we were thinking about it a quarter century ago, we thought we had a little bit more time. We thought it would be in the course of this century that we'd see big changes playing out, but we were too conservative. So far, human beings have raised the temperature of the Earth about 1 degree, and that 1 degree is already producing enormous effects. The map of the world is changing. If you look at the world from space in summertime, the Arctic looks entirely different than it did 30 or 40 years ago. We've lost as much as 3/4 of the summer sea ice in the Arctic, one of the world's great physical features, all but gone. The chemistry of the world is changing. We're an ocean planet. And those oceans are 30% more acidic than they were 40 years ago because seawater absorbs carbon from the atmosphere and its chemistry shifts, and those shifts in chemistry make it very, very hard for the creatures at the bottom of the marine food chain to make their living. The color of the world is changing. You know that the snowpack up in the Sierras is gone, but the same is true up and down this continent. There was a story yesterday talking about how snow across the northern hemisphere has been steadily retreating, and as a result, the albedo of the Earth, its reflectivity, is shifting in dangerous ways. What I'm trying to say is the most basic facts, the biggest physical features on this Earth are now influx, and influx for the first time in our civilization's history. The most important thing that happened in the lifetime of everyone in this room was sometime in the last 20, 25 years, we invisibly crossed the line that took us out of the Holocene, the 10,000-year period of benign climatic stability that coincided not coincidentally with the rise of human civilization. Every human being that we know about, that we have records of, lived in the Holocene, but not us. We live in what comes next, and the practical effects are already upon us. Yes, the drought in California is terrible. Terrible. The drought in California is not as bad as the drought has been in other parts of the world. The academics are pretty clear now that it was the worst drought in the history of the Fertile Crescent that helped kick off the horrible civil war in Syria that's now spread across the Middle East. Millions of people had to leave their farms and crowd into cities, and with that, as often happens, started to come conflict. It's not just drought, it's not just a hotter world drying up more of the water. Once that water's up in the atmosphere, it's going to come down, and increasingly it comes down in deluge. You watched what happened in Texas and Oklahoma last week. You saw the pictures, but the numbers are way scarier even than the pictures were. We've been keeping records in Texas and Oklahoma since 1895 of rainfall, so we know how much rain has come down every month since 1895. May of this year, Oklahoma beat the old rainiest month in history by 24% and Texas by 17%. Those of you who know anything about statistics and about large data sets know that that's statistically absurd, statistically impossible, but it happens, and it's possible because the world of those old records is not the one we live in anymore. The world we live in is different. The world we live in this week, India is suffering through a heat wave of remarkable dimension. Thousands of people dead, the very pavement melting. The fifth deadliest heat wave in the planet's history, and almost all of them in the last few years. 2014 was the warmest year in human history, and so far it looks like 2015 is going to crush that record. But we're still at the beginning of all of this. As I said, we have raised the temperature of the planet 1 degree, and we seem certain to come close to raising it 2, even if we did everything right, but we're not doing everything right on the current track at which we're emitting CO2. We're going to raise the temperature 4 or 5 degrees Celsius, 7, 8, 9 degrees Fahrenheit before this century is out, and if we do that, then we cannot have a civilization like the one we enjoy in any of its dimensions. Just think about how profoundly transformed that world would be. Temperature has gone up 1 degree, and already it's incredibly difficult to carry out agriculture in places like California. Imagine what it's like if we just keep going up and up and up. We can't let that happen. And the good news, and there is at least a little bit of good news. The good news is that we know now how we would solve this problem if we wanted to solve it. The scientists did their job in warning us about this problem, and the engineers have done their job in helping us understand what we could switch to from coal and gas and oil. When we talked about renewable energy 25 years ago, we mostly did it with our fingers crossed, but no more. In the last 6 years, the price of a solar panel has come down 75%. Across huge swaths of the planet now, the cheapest way to produce power is with the solar panel. And in a few places where we've really gone to work, you can see how renewable energy scales up. The Danes generate about 40% of their power now with wind. There were days last week when they were generating more than 100% of their power needs from the wind and shipping the rest of it off to Germany. The Germans generate some days this summer 80% of their power from solar panels within their borders. Costa Rica, which has worked hard on this, ran for the first 4 months of this year entirely on renewable electricity. We could easily scale this up, not for free, not without effort, but we could do it. Yesterday, a group of scientists and economists calling themselves the Apollo Coalition from all over the world said that with an effort comparable to the one that went into producing the moonshot of the 1960s, we would be able by 2025 to be running the world on renewable energy. And if we did, it's not just that it would be solving the problems of climate change, it would also be solving the equally horrible problems of pollution around the world. We're used to thinking of California and Los Angeles as a smoggy place, but it's cleaner than it used to be, and even at its worst, it's nothing compared to what it's like right now today in places like Delhi. There was a study that came out this week indicating that Delhi, which has the worst air in the world now, that half the children there, 2.2 million children, have irreversible lung damage. We think that 1 in 6 people in India now die as the result of air pollution. And there's lots of other people there without any access to energy at all, living far off any electric grid, for whom the cheapest, quickest way to get some access to some of what we enjoy would be the quick dispersal of renewable energy to all those places. And yet, as of now, we're not doing these things. We're not engaged in an Apollo project to put up renewable energy. We're not knocking ourselves out to make things happen. Just the opposite. If you look at, say, Washington, you could argue fairly effectively that we've engaged in a 25-year bipartisan effort to accomplish nothing. All of which, and since this is a conference of philosophers, all of which makes this not just an urgent question, but an interesting one which has some things to say about our civilization. The effects of climate change are like an asteroid strike. That's the same damage that we're going to do, the same kind of extinction rates and things. But its causes aren't like an asteroid strike. It's not some bolt from the blue. It's obviously bound up in who we are and how we've organized our lives, which makes it an illuminating question. One could talk for a very long time about all the different possibilities from psychology and theology and every place else about how we've come to think of the world and treat the world the way we do. But for practical purposes, my colleagues and I think that the single biggest answer, and the one we need to address most immediately, the best explanation for why we've done so little about the problem that we face, the crisis that we face, lies in the power of the fossil fuel industry. It's the richest industry on Earth, and it's been able to exploit that wealth to keep change from happening, and continues to do so. Last week, even amidst those record rains in Texas, even as people were being pulled from swollen rivers, the CEO of Exxon got up at their annual meeting and, as reporters put it, mocked renewable energy and said that if there turned out to be any problem with climate change, like inclement weather, as he put it, or sea level rise, then we would develop technologies to deal with that. Shell dumped all its solar and wind investments over the last few years instead in the single greatest act of greed-fueled irony that the world has ever seen. Shell is leading the charge up north, having melted the waters of the Arctic. They did not say, maybe we should go into the solar business. They sold their solar business and said, now that we've melted the Arctic, it'll be easier to drill up there for more oil. There's really nothing quite more emblematic of our craziness than that, but it goes on and on. The Koch brothers, taken together, are the richest man on Earth. They've made their money in oil and gas. They're the biggest leaseholders up in the tar sands in Canada. They've announced they're going to spend $900 million on the next federal election in this country. They'll spend more money than the Republicans or the Democrats, Koch brothers party of two. And they will spend it to make sure that the status quo remains in place. Left to their own devices, all these guys are able, I think, to delay change long enough to break the planet. The renewable energy gets cheaper all the time. The gains in engineering haven't been enough yet to allow us to overcome the huge century-long head start that fossil fuel gets, nor the amazing subsidies that it's able to win with its political power. The International Monetary Fund estimated last year that each year the world generates about $5.3 trillion in subsidy for the fossil fuel industry. What's interesting for me is the question of whether these guys are beatable, and if so, how. And I think, though I don't know, I think that they are. It's going to take a very different kind of movement than we've ever seen before, but that's beginning to form. Now, global consciousness is one of those phrases, frankly, to which I'm somewhat allergic. It sounds kind of hippy-dippy. On the other hand, this is the first truly global problem that we've ever faced, and our elites are not solving it, our systems are not working, and so we are going to need a global grassroots movement. They have most of the money. Lacking it, we need another currency. And the only currency we have to work with is the currency of movements, passion, spirit, creativity. So let's talk about these things. I'm going to try and show a few, see if this works. Try and show a few pictures here for you all, and just give you a sense of who your brothers and sisters in this fight are, because they now come from everywhere. We started 350.org 7 years ago now, myself and 7 college students up there in Vermont, and we had no idea what we were doing, and no money, and no whatever, but we had great desire to go out and organize the world, ludicrous as that sounds, and so we just sort of set about it. We tried to find people like ourselves all over the place. And there's not everywhere something called an environmentalist, but everywhere there's someone who cares about hunger and food, about public health, about development, about war and peace, about women's rights, about all the things that will not exist on a quickly degrading planet. And so those were the people we tried to pull together. We asked everybody, so now 6 years ago, to come together for this first big day of action. Some of you took part in it. We picked almost at random a weekend, a Saturday in the fall, at least fall in the northern hemisphere, and we didn't know how it would go. We had no real reason to expect that we'd be able to pull this off, because no one really had ever tried. But we got the first sense that it might kind of work. 2 days earlier, Thursday, we were sitting around our little office, the 8 of us, doing our last-minute chores, putting out press releases, and the phone rang, the satellite phone rang, and it was our leader in Ethiopia, and like many of our leaders, probably most of them, she was a she, and like many of them, she was 17, and she was in tears. She said, the government's taken away our permit for Saturday, so we're going to do this today before they can stop us. And that was brave, because it's not a very nice government, but that wasn't why she was in tears. She just kept saying, we want to do this the same day as everybody else. We didn't want to jump the gun. We want to be part of the big thing. And we have right now, I don't know, there we go. We have right now, she said, out in the street, 15,000 kids chanting 350. Okay, so we were like, Luau, don't worry about the date, it's okay. And it was okay. You know, we went on to organize very quickly. That weekend, there were 5,200 demonstrations in 181 countries around the world. CNN described it as the most widespread day of political activity in the planet's history. And it was beautiful to watch. Beautiful to watch. For me, because I'd always heard this thing that environmentalism was something that rich white people did, and if you didn't know where your next meal was coming from, you wouldn't be an environmentalist, and on and on. It took about 10 minutes of watching those pictures, which I hope we can keep showing. Yes, watching those pictures, we don't need to look at me. Watching those pictures come in from around the world, for it to be entirely clear, to me anyway, that most of the people we were working with were poor, black, brown, Asian, and young, because that's what most of the world actually consists of. And what do you know? People exactly as interested in the future as anybody else, maybe more so, because, you know, if you're in some of those places, the future bears down very hard on you. And there was a great deal of beautiful creativity shown in many parts of the planet, and remarkable leadership from religious communities for the first time. There's the head of Muslim South Africa, the head of kind of indigenous groups next to him, behind him in the scarlet, the Anglican Archbishop, the head of this huge multi-faith march. There's, you know, our biggest evangelical college. That's where Billy Graham went. I'd been to the Middle East to do some organizing, not an easy place to get to, obviously. You know, in Bethlehem, there were barriers everywhere. We were trying to bring together people from all sort of countries, but because the Dead Sea is shrinking so rapidly as it warms, but there were too many armies in the way, and so the Jordanians said, we'll make the big 3 on our beach, and the Palestinians said, we'll do the 5 on ours, and the Israelis took care of the 0 on their shores. And there were 300 big demonstrations across China, which was really important. And those are our brothers and sisters in the Maldives, illustrating the existential problem that comes when the sea begins to rise, as it is now rising. That's the Student Government Association holding their meeting in the lagoon. This is paradise, the Maldives. You know? It's Vandana, you've probably been there sometime. It's the most beautiful, one of the most beautiful places in the whole world. All islands, an archipelago, 1,200 islands strung out across the equator in the Indian Ocean. The only problem with the whole place is that the highest spot is about 1.5 meters, 2 meters above sea level, which is a hell of a bad place to be in the 21st century. But they're working like crazy. Everybody working like crazy. This was the biggest story on Google News for about 36 hours, and I always thought that it was because most of the demonstrations most of the people didn't look the way that editors thought environmentalists was to look like. So there's Yemen, which is as tough a place as there is in the world, and that 0 is all women in full black burqa. So to us, they don't look like, you know, the local chapter of the Sierra Club, but their hearts are in exactly the same place. They're thinking not about themselves, but about the future, about the community. The same all over the world. There were 300 or 400 pictures that ended up in a file just marked 350 adorable. And they were indeed adorable. And they were also really hard to look at. Look, those girls are likely to be refugees before the century is out and not through anything they've done. So we've kept up this kind of stuff. I think we've organized about 20,000 of these demonstrations all over the world in every corner of it. And it's been beautiful and fun and work that I really love. And we'll keep doing it. But you know what? At a certain point, we've even done these huge art projects. They called them the biggest art projects in the world. So many people, you had to get sort of satellites to take the picture. There's a picture from Santa Fe of one of the dried out riverbeds they have there, just like they do here. But when the satellite came over, a few thousand people flung blue blankets up overhead just to bring it back to life for a minute. It's a beautiful picture. I kind of wish we'd just keep doing that work forever and ever. And I think if we had 50 years to solve this problem, that's what we would do, because it's kind of education in action. beautiful to do. But we don't have 50 years. Basically, we had to start 25 years ago, you know, if we were going to deal with it, solve it. And so, instead, we've tried very hard to learn how to kind of up the ante, raise the stakes, become not just educational, but confrontational, and pretty fast. So, there we go. Some of you have followed, for instance, these fights that have sprung up around infrastructure around the world. We kind of began it, in a sense, in 2011 with the fight about the Keystone Pipeline. Now, this fight had been going on for a little while already, waged by our indigenous brothers and sisters on both sides of the border in this continent. The rise of kind of First Nations environmentalism is one of the great stories of the last 3 or 4 years, and it's one of the things that's just propelling this movement forward so fast. I'm on my way to Minnesota tomorrow to march with a lot of Native Americans working on big pipeline things up there in the upper Midwest. But that pipeline was going to go through, like all pipelines have always gone through. It was an absolutely done deal. There was a poll of energy insiders in Washington in 2011. That summer, 300 energy insiders, lobbyists, committee staff, things, and 91% of them said that TransCanada would have their permit for the Keystone Pipeline by the end of 2011. But then Jim Hansen at NASA put out a paper saying there's so much carbon up there in the tar sands that if you burn it all, you'll never get the climate under control. And then people began to come out of the woodwork to fight. That's what that picture is of. It's of the beginning of what became the largest civil disobedience action about anything in this country in about 30 years. 1,200 and some people went to jail. I bet a few of them are in this room tonight, and it was beautiful. And then it started spreading all over the world. And, back to Washington, and a month later or 2 months later, we were ringing the White House with thousands upon thousands of people standing shoulder to shoulder all around the White House. And that was in 2011, and right about then, Barack Obama said, okay, maybe we should put this on hold for a while, at least until after the next election. And he did, and then we kept fighting, and so we kept it on hold through the next election after that. That's been a lot of elections now, and it's been the better part of 4 years. 4 years when we've been able to keep, thanks to the work that you all have done, 800,000 or 900,000 barrels a day of the dirtiest oil on Earth underground. We're causing big financial problems for the people up in the tar sands by doing it. 3 huge projects were canceled last summer, even before the price of oil began to fall, because companies that were thinking of building these big new expansions knew that they had no real way to get this stuff to market. Now Canadian people, led by First Nations people, have blocked the route that goes to the west, to the Pacific. Now they're blocking the route that goes to the east. We hope that we're going to win this Keystone fight sometime in the next few months, but we don't know. We do know that by doing it, we've been able to launch a kind of groundswell of action against every kind of bad fossil fuel infrastructure. There was a speech last week by the head of the American Natural Gas Association who was talking to his industry and saying, we have somehow got to stop the Keystoneization of every pipeline in the country. That was music to my ears. They are never going to build one of these for free again. We're going to stop the planned coal ports along the Pacific Northwest. There were 6 of them proposed 3 years ago. We've already beaten 4 of them, and the other 2 are going to fall. We're going to stop. We've already watched amazing organizing bring fracking to an end in New York State, and we are determined to bring fracking to an end in California. So it no longer mars the environmental record of this state. Let me just say, if you want the definition of obscenity, it's in the middle of a drought to be taking millions of gallons of water and putting it in a hole in the ground in order to produce more oil that will make the next drought worse.
Yeah, right.
So these huge battles going on, and they're going on everywhere. I was talking this morning with my colleagues in Australia. We're battling this huge mine, the biggest coal mine in the world if it gets built in the Galilee Basin, but I think we're going to win there too. And there is just beautiful in every corner of the world. We're calling it, keep it in the ground, you know, this understanding that we can't build these huge new fossil fuel things that will keep us hooked to this stuff for another few decades. But, man, it's like playing whack-a-mole. It's too many of them all the time. If that's all we do, eventually we're going to get overwhelmed because they just keep coming. That's why, instead of just playing defense, we're doing our best to play offense too, to push back hard against these guys. That's what this divestment movement that we started a couple of years ago was about. I wrote the kind of article that helped launch it just about exactly 3 years ago. It was in Rolling Stone. And if you keep your back issues, it was the one with Justin Bieber. But it turned out that I got a call from the editor a couple of days later saying something weird's going on. Your piece has 10 times as many likes on Facebook as Justin Bieber's, which I attribute in part to my soulful days, you know, but more to the fact that it had a whole new set of numbers in it. I was working with this data that had just come out from financial analysts in London who'd done something we should have done long ago. They added up how much fossil fuel, how much carbon the fossil fuel industry already had in its reserves, the coal and oil gas it had mapped and announced that it would plan to burn, and it turns out that there's about 5 times as much carbon in those reserves as would take us past the 2-degree red line limit. That's the one limit the world has ever set. It's not a very good limit. If 1 degree melts the Arctic, we're idiots to find out what 2 degrees will do, but it's the only thing the world's ever agreed on, the only even beginning of a line in the sand that we have. And at the moment, if we follow the business plan of the fossil fuel industry, we are going to soar past it. They've got 5 times as much. They're not normal companies, they're rogue companies. If they follow their business plan, the planet tanks. There's no need to have conferences like this one. The end of the story is written. At least it's written in their promises to their shareholders and their lenders and things. Unless we can change that script and change it fast, then this isn't going to work. But we are changing that script, at least as fast as we can. This divestment movement has turned into an enormous crescendo. Began small, the first few months, a few sort of environmental colleges and things in far-flung corners of the world. But then it just started rocketing along. Places like Stanford began to get involved. Then last fall, on the day when we had 400,000 people marching through the streets of Manhattan, on the biggest day of climate protest in the planet's history, that was beautiful. And just as beautiful was that evening when Uptown, the representatives of the Rockefeller family, announced that they were divesting their philanthropies, billions of dollars, from coal and gas and oil. And that's pretty amazing if you think about it. There's the first family of fossil fuel, okay? The original oil fortune. And they said it's no longer financially prudent or morally okay to be invested in this stuff. They'd heeded the call from people like Desmond Tutu, demanding action. And I knew that that was a watershed moment. I knew in a sense that that day marked the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel age. The only question is how fast that end will come and whether we can make it happen fast enough to affect the runaway physics of climate change. But it's been amazing to watch in the last few weeks, the kind of people that have joined this fight. Oxford University, the oldest university in the English-speaking language, the Church of England, the University of Hawaii, which had some of your local experts, thank you, Mr. Hooper, out from from Pitzer College, which had divested, went out there to the University of Hawaii and helped them figure out how to do it. Some of the things were just beyond belief. Last week, the largest insurance company in France with about $500 billion worth of assets under its management announced that it was divesting from coal. Yesterday, no, actually tomorrow, we're almost certain that tomorrow, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway, the biggest single pot of money on the planet, $962 billion, will announce its divestment from coal. Earlier today, Georgetown University announced that it was beginning to divest. That's beautiful news. That's one of the two most important Catholic colleges in the nation. The reach of that Jesuit Pope is really beginning to demonstrate. Earlier today, there was a story in The Guardian about a speech last night from the former chairman of Shell Oil. And the former chairman of Shell Oil said, the oil industry is doing nothing to solve this problem. It's making the same mistakes it's been making for 20 years. It has no intention of solving it. He said divestment is the rational response. So we're hopeful that every denomination will join in, that they'll follow the Unitarians, the United Church of Christ, and the Church of England in divesting. We're hopeful that every college will join in, including, without at the risk of being a slightly ungrateful guest, including Pomona. It's incredibly important. It's incredibly important to have solar panels and LEED certified buildings and things, but the endowment is just as much a part of the university as the dining hall, and if one of them is going to be green, they both should be. So, the point is, none of this happened by accident, and none of it happened for free. It happened because people got involved in movements and made it happen. There were big sit-ins and civil disobedience in so many of those colleges and schools and places, and that vision is sort of spreading around the world, and it needs to spread far more. So we need all of you engaged, and we need you engaged in every kind of way. Most of it is the normal work of writing letters and calling officials. The California Senate yesterday voted to divest CalSTRS and CalPERS from coal, which is very good. It goes now, and Senator Kevin De Leon was the key guy and a good guy. But it goes now to the Assembly, where it's going to be a harder fight. So those of you who know who your Assembly person is, call. And those of you who don't, shame on you, and look it up. We got to fight here in California, fracking. We got to fight all the universities and colleges that you all come from. We've got to fight for divestment. Find a battleground and dig in, join this movement, and join it in a serious way. I said that this was the biggest battle that we've ever faced as a civilization, and I meant it. There's nothing we've ever come up against that's as big, and there's nothing that we've ever come up against where the action that we have to take has to be taken now. Most times that we face social problems, wars, they stand there and wait for us to do something about it. You know, those who fought in the civil rights movement had to be very, very brave. It's more dangerous than to be an environmentalist. People got killed, they got shot. At least in this country, that's not happening yet to environmentalists, though it is in other places around the world. But they did have in the civil rights movement an advantage that we don't have, which was complete confidence that eventually they would prevail. Dr. King ended every talk. He would say, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. He was quoting from Theodore Parker, abolitionist minister. The arc of the physical universe is short, and it bends toward heat. If we don't get this done soon, then we don't get it done, which is why, along with writing and calling and Facebooking and all the other things that we do now, which is why we also need some of you engaged in those ways that humans have traditionally, at least for the last 100 years, summoned up energy, the moral energy to change the world. When people look back on the 20th century, they will not conclude that the great invention was nuclear energy. I think they'll think that that was more or less a kind of dead end, you know. They'll think 100 or 200 years from now that the greatest technological innovation of the 20th century came from India, and that it was the technology of nonviolent direct action. And we need some of you engaged in it. Now, I say this more easily than I usually do, because as I look out at this audience, I notice that we could call this the Whitehead Conference for more reasons than one. I always am a little reluctant to tell young people to go off and get arrested. Because if you are 22 right now in our economy, it's possible that an arrest record is not the single best thing for your resume. But one of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? When I wrote the letter asking people to come to Washington and get arrested, that was one of the things I said. We don't want young people to be cannon fodder here. So it was good fun. The young people are leading this movement. It was good fun to see that the people who volunteered to do that were often of an age. And we did not ask people as they were getting arrested, how old are you? That would be rude. We did cleverly say, I think, who was president when you were born? The two biggest cohorts came from the FDR and Truman administrations. The last day there was a guy arrested with a sign around his neck that said World War II vet handled with care. He was old enough that he'd been born in the Warren Harding administration, and that was long enough ago I'd almost forgotten there was a Warren Harding administration. But that was beautiful. And the young people who were there saw their elders acting the way that elders are supposed to act in a working society, okay? In a working civilization. So I asked you to help in some of these ways. And I ask you to do it without any guarantee that we're going to win. There is none. It's possible that we've waited too long to get started. We're clearly not going to stop global warming. That's no longer on the menu, but maybe we can keep it from getting completely out of control. The physics indicates that even that is a stretch at this point and will require, well, it's a narrow window and it's closing fast, and it means working with incredible speed and power to make transformative change in short order. We know what those changes should be, the kind of things that would really help us. We desperately need a price on carbon to reflect the damage that it does in the atmosphere. And we desperately need a kind of World War II style effort to take renewable energy now and put it to use every place around the world. We know we need those things, but we can't have them right now because The power of the fossil fuel industry is so great that it holds our capital and most other capitals. It holds Delhi and Beijing and many others in its thrall. It keeps us from making that kind of change. And unless we can break that power, little will happen. I can't guarantee that we can, but I can guarantee, and this is the thing I want to leave you with, I can guarantee that those of you who are in this fight, you're not in it alone. That every place around the world now, there are people engaged, fighting. There are people meeting tonight in rooms like this in every continent and in most countries, and they are trying to figure out what they can do and how they can do it together with other people. In this century, we've been given this gift to make use of for the first time, the ability to really link up and come together. It's not an unmixed blessing, the internet, but it is perhaps the kind of blessing that we need if we can figure out how to knit ourselves together fast enough, if we can figure out how to use it, not to trade petitions on email, but to bring people out into the real world, to get them engaged in this fight. No guarantee we're going to win, but there is a guarantee that we're going to fight. And what an honor it is to get to do it shoulder to shoulder with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. And again, a thank you to John for bringing us all together. And this opening ceremony for me was very special because it brought together the First Nations of this land. And I think one of the big errors of history has been the assumption that Columbus discovered America. Yeah. So we need to get rid of that one. And the second big error is the 250-year-old error that progress depends on fossil fuels. If we get those two removed, we'll do very well. And the fact that you had China and India, and I think they're amazing powers. They're amazing powers to show another path of an ecological civilization. The fact that we've been around so long shows that on our own terms, we did get it right. But the reason China and India are being celebrated is for this crazy indicator called growth, which didn't last in the industrial countries, and it's not going to last on fossil fuels in China and India. And so I'm so glad there's such large numbers of our Chinese brothers and sisters here to evolve the deeper ideas for an ecological civilization, which I've been referring to as Earth democracy, after Seattle, when they said the anti-globalization movement knew what it was against. We didn't know what we were for. So I said, well, we'll write and tell you. We are for the planet, we are for community, we are for love, we are for compassion. We are for creating abundance and security for all. We're not for the 1%. And to be critical of a model that benefits the 1% is not being illiterate, but knowing a little more of process and relationship. So I come from India, I come from the Himalaya, and I was so happy to hear the mayor talk about how the hills will not be developed. Now, isn't there something strange that when we want to protect something for its beauty and ecological functions, we say it won't be developed? And something's wrong with development if we have to keep it out of everything that's precious. And something's wrong with growth if all it's giving us is more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, more polluted water, in India more farmers dying, 300,000 have committed suicide, the heat wave right now has killed 2,500 people, but just about 3 weeks before that, when we should be having spring, we had hailstorms and rains in an untimely way at harvest time, which destroyed about 50% of the crop of North India, which is the food belt and the food basket. And 2 years ago, of course, the glaciers of the Himalaya are melting, and within the century they won't be there, which means the snow that provides water to half of humanity, the Himalaya is the water base for half of humanity, it won't be there. And we need to prepare for it. Maldives, being as low as it is with sea level rise, you said it's not the best place to be. But what is a good place to be with this climate havoc? You think you're in a dry area, you get a flood. You think you're in the mountains and not near the sea, so you're safe, but you get glacial melt, heavy rain, and 2 years ago, 2013, just 2 days, 16th and 17th of June, we got such intense rain that with the glacial lake bursting and the rains and the maldevelopment, in my region of the Ganges catchment, 20,000 people were washed away. So we're talking of devastation and death today, not way down in the future. When the climate treaty was written, they always talked about 100 years down the line. Now, it's happening now. And I could go on with examples from my region, and in my short life, where the last 20 years have created instability like we've never seen. Bill referred to the Fertile Crescent, the Syrian unrest. 2009 was a very severe drought. 80% of the crop failed. 70% of the animals died. And the people moved into cities. And then Assad, of course, brought out his police and armies. And the West armed the rebels. Before you know it, those arms are now creating a third entity called ISIS. The word didn't exist in newspapers before a few years. The word Boko Haram in Nigeria did not exist before 2009. And we've just done a manifesto called Terra Viva on what's happening to the soil and the land and the climate and the future of life on Earth. And the Secretary General, former Secretary General of the Desertification Convention was with us, and he's from that area. And he showed maps of how Lake Chad has disappeared, which supported agriculture, supported pastoralists. There's no water, their livelihoods are gone, and today they're fighting each other. And it is interpreted as if it is a religious problem. It's a problem of making life unlivable. There is no religion that is saying destroy the earth. All religions, and I think there will be the wisdom discussion in the tracks during this conference. But when you look at what the religions are saying, all of them are saying the same thing about protecting the planet, taking care of each other. And I think we really need to work together to stop allowing the misuse of religion in perpetuating war, as well as maldevelopment. Now, I, of course, have spent the last 30 years working with agriculture, and about 15 years ago wrote my book, Soil Not Oil. And I think we really need to keep fossil fuels underground. They were never meant to become the basis of life on Earth. Life is better without fossil fuels, I can tell you, because we have a fossil fuel-free farm. But I think we need to increase more carbon in the soil, because part of what's happening is the rupture of the carbon cycle, something you learn very early in life. What goes out should be reabsorbed by the biosphere. We are not allowing its reabsorption because we are destroying the capacity, but we are emitting far more than could be absorbed. And we've done the calculations with agriculture. My book, Soil Not Oil, I worked out that 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the same model of the economy and development in agriculture that is leading to greenhouse gases. 40% of the carbon dioxide, the nitrogen oxide, which is 300 times more lethal for destabilizing climate patterns. And methane. You don't have to have methane emissions if you don't put animals in factory farms and don't waste half the food. You won't have nitrogen emissions if you're not using synthetic fertilizers. In fact, our leguminous plants are designed to take nitrogen out of the air and fix it. That's why the First Nations always grew the three sisters, the corn and the beans and the squash. We have the capacity to not just mitigate, but adapt. And the calculations are that with 2 tons per hectare of increased organic matter and carbon in the soil, we could actually close that emissions gap of 10 gigatons and bring down the atmospheric pollution and carbon dioxide load to 350. With a combination of keeping the fossilized carbon, the black carbon underground, and making the green carbon, which is life, increase. We want to make a shift from the black and the deadly and the destructive to the living. And the beautiful thing is that it doesn't just help us mitigate, it helps us adapt. When we have these untimely rains, I was getting calls from our farmers from across northern India, and they would say, in India everyone becomes a relationship, you know, I'm everyone's Didi, elder sister. And say, Didi, I used our seeds and I did organic, as you've taught us, and my crop was standing. It did not get destroyed by the rain. Because the soil has more water absorption capacity and there's more resilience in the plants. So we need to think more of resilience. We need to think more of how does a small farmer, small community survive today with the impacts, or the impacts that are going to be there, as Bill pointed out. But what's good for the climate is also good for food security. We actually end up producing more food. It's good for dealing with a water crisis like the drought. I was so happy to be taken by a former student to a garden he's made by tearing up their lawn. And they're actually generating water in terms of water harvesting now from their little urban plot. And the messages from both the councillor from Los Angeles and the mayor that this drought has to become California's moment of making a shift from the fossilized thinking of a fossil fuels base, because it is fossilized thinking, you know. It's so old and obsolete and out of tune with what we need. But it's good for local economies, it's good for the soil, and 2015 is the year of soil. And as the situation shows with what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Africa, it's good for peace. If the soils are fertile and people are growing food and we've stabilized the climate, people will stay home. Refugee creation is part of the same process that's putting too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, is pushing people off the land and out of their homes. And I'm just so happy with the diverse movement, because when I was a young student, we were fighting against apartheid. And apartheid was won because of precisely that withdrawal of the world's support to keeping the apartheid regime around. What we are facing today is what I call eco-apartheid. Apartheid means separation. Eco-apartheid means this pretense that we are separated from the planet. both in terms of a progress that's based on destroying the planet, and in our minds, every model of science and economy and technology defined in terms of an escape. And while we need the financial divestment, I think we also need a moral, ethical divestment through our lives and the way we live. And that withdrawal, the good thing is that that withdrawal from the fossil fuel economy and that withdrawal from an industrial agriculture based on the fossil fuel economy actually improves our lives. It builds communities. It rebuilds local economies. And actions that make Exxon and Shell irrelevant to our lives are the same actions that make the Monsantos irrelevant to our lives. I think a few months ago I sent you a message, Bill, saying the fight for protecting the biodiversity and life of this planet and the fight for arresting dangerous climate change are the same fight, because the players, you call them, basically, you nearly call them gangsters and criminals, which I would totally agree with you. I call it a mafia economy of the 1%. And I want to just tell you two things which connect the two issues. Monsanto has bought up the single biggest climate data corporation in the world. And it's bought up the single biggest soil data corporation in the world. So they're preparing for using climate change to expand their control and expand their hold. We have to do what you said, turn non-violent action into our celebration of our capacity, our potential, our freedom. Gandhi's word for it was satyagraha, the fight for truth, the force of truth, and the force of the truth of this planet and its laws, and the force of the truth of our humanity and our capacities. I do not think any amount of criminal action can extinguish that. So let's take a pledge. 2nd October is Gandhi's birth anniversary, the day of Satyagraha, recognized by the United Nations. Let's turn it into a big celebration of a better life, a better worldview, a better earth community. I'll be at Gandhi's ashram taking a pledge. I hope each of you will, wherever you